So, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me a great pleasure to introduce a great musician and member of that Psygnosis team, Mr. Mike Clarke.
Hello.
So, maybe let's sit down. Okay, so thank you for coming to Warsaw. Just a moment. Możemy włączyć drugi mikrofon? Dobra.
There we go. I arrived.
Okay.
Hello.
Okay, so thank you for coming to Warsaw. This is your first visit to Poland, is it?
Yes, first visit.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Oh, there we are.
Oh.
I'm back again. Yes.
Okay, so
Yes. Well, gone again.
just a moment. So we'll change the mics.
Yeah. Hello. There
Yeah.
we go. That's better. Yes, first time in Poland. Hello to
Okay.
everybody.
And it's raining.
Yeah, it's a good introduction, but at least it's warm. So
Yes,
that's a
it's
good
very
thing.
warm. It was very cold lately. Okay, did you get around the event, checking things out?
I've had a quick blast around the halls, but I haven't spent a great deal of time, which I will over the next few days. So if anybody has any more questions after this session, then just grab hold of me. I'll be around checking things out.
Okay. So Mike, most of the people that were involved in the early home computer business, games in particular, come from the analog background, I might say. And not many of them were actually trained or educated to go with this career.
Correct. Yeah.
So let me ask you, are you a trained musician or were you just a kid enjoying the computers back then?
I was the latter, yeah, just a kid enjoying computers.
Okay.
The only musical training I had was I got to grade 1 violin in school, and that was it. But for some reason, I'd always had an attachment to music. I always knew all of the top 10 in the chart and everything for every single week. But I never really created anything until I got my Amiga, and that opened the door for it then.
Okay, so how did you start with computers? I bet you played a lot of games in the 80s.
I did. Commodore 64 was my first machine. And of course, because I had a big music following, I mean, even Zap 64, the biggest magazine in the UK, had a reader's music chart for the games music. It was a big deal at the time, so that was it was a big influence on me. And because I couldn't really program anything at the time, and there weren't any consumer music programs, I didn't really have a way to make music myself on the Commodore 64.
Okay.
So I would play games and hope one day that I'd learn to be able to do it myself.
Okay, so you didn't program anything on C64, or did you type basic programs? And
Yeah, basic programs is everybody starts with that, but
Yes.
I didn't really understand how computers worked, to be honest.
Really?
I didn't understand how fast computer processors work. I remember reading in the manual how to play sounds in BASIC, and it had
A lot of pokes.
It is, yeah, a lot of pokes, but you do them in sequence, and it says. I remember it saying in the manual that you set channel 1, you set channel 2, and you set channel 3, and it plays a chord. And I couldn't understand that even though you program them one after the other, it's so fast that it will play them all at the same time.
Okay.
And I couldn't quite understand how the computers worked at that point. So I did a adventure game in BASIC and a few other little basic programs here and there. But it was a few years later until I just got it, and then I could program properly.
So no 652 assembly, nothing like this? Just,
No, not then.
Just playing games and
later.
enjoying it?
That's right, yeah.
Okay. So tell us something about how was it to be a teenager in UK in the 80s who enjoyed home computers? Did you hang around stores, maybe went to computer fairs or computer clubs?
At the beginning there was a big split in the UK between the Commodore owners and the Spectrum owners.
Yes,
so there was
obviously.
quite a lot of people in school had a Spectrum or a Commodore, and we swapped
was it
games.
BBC computer in schools?
Yeah, there was a BBC.
Yeah.
But in the Northwest, the BBC was really expensive compared to the others,
Yes.
and it was more people in the South that had the BBCs.
Okay.
We had it in school, but there were very few people around where I lived that actually had one at home to play with. So yeah, we'd swap games, and there was like a group. The people who were into computers were really into computers, really. So it was quite an intense hobby. It was basically go home from school, play on the computers, go to bed, go to school, come back, play on computers. And I used to have people come to mine. People would come to my house to play on the Commodore 64 because I had quite a lot of games. And
the Spectrum guys or just your colleagues?
it was just the Commodore 64 group, really.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, the guy next door had a Spectrum.
So you hated him?
And, no, I didn't hate him, but I knew I had the better machine.
Okay. Okay, so when the 80s headed to the end, the Amiga was getting more and more attention. So
Yep.
do you remember the first time you saw Amiga computer in action?
Yeah, I do actually. It was at the Commodore show in Manchester.
Okay.
Now, this was the first time I'd seen a computer event that was near me and wasn't in London.
Oh, okay.
So my dad agreed to take me, and they had an Amiga 1000 there. And
What year was it?
Oh, God. That's,
80 something.
87 or 88, I suppose.
Okay.
And they had an Amiga 1000 with Leaderboard, the golf game.
Yep.
And I thought the Commodore 64 one looked a bit better. So I wasn't really very impressed at the beginning. But a couple of years later, it was the only upgrade path from Commodore 64 to Amiga, so I had to get one.
Yeah, so when did you finally get an Amiga in your hands?
Well, I sold all of my Commodore 64 stuff, and I gave the money to my mum and dad, and they
Okay.
got me an Amiga that Christmas.
Okay, so
And that was
was
a big
Christmas 89, 8, 7?
I'm not sure, 88 or 89 it must have been. How old was I? 15. Yeah, it must have been about, well, yeah, I was 13 or 14, so probably Christmas 88, I think.
88.
Yeah.
So was it Amiga 500?
It was, yeah,
Yeah,
Amiga
with
500.
megabyte of
No,
memory.
512K.
500?
Oh, I had to save for about 6 months to get my 512K expansion. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, okay. We all know that your Amiga, with Amiga you were creating those tunes,
Yeah.
right? And before working in the games industry, you did create tunes for yourself.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so you were sharing those tunes with your colleagues?
After I'd had the Amiga for about a year, I found out that there was a computer club nearby. Which is surprising that I didn't know that, because now I realize just how many games were being made around where I lived.
Where do you live?
Where I lived on the Wirral near Liverpool. And
Okay, Liverpool.
There's so many developers around there. I didn't know at the time. But I found out about this computer club, so I went along to there, and we just used to copy games. But then one day I got the Ultimate Sound Tracker, and then I went home and basically stopped playing games. That was it. I just wrote music every day.
You went straight into
I did, yeah.
sound tracker.
It just made sense to me, the whole tracker format. It was just easy samples, inserting data. It fit with how my mind worked, and that's what I did then from then on. So, yeah.
Okay. So please tell us something about is it Psygnosis? Is it Psygnosis?
It's
or
Psygnosis.
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 Psygnosis. Okay. So tell us about your involvement with Psygnosis. How did they find you?
Well, that same computer club, actually. One of the friends I met at that computer club, he ended up getting a job at Psygnosis as a tester. And I'd been doing quite a lot of music at that point, and I'd already done Last Ninja 2.
Yes.
Again, from a guy at the computer club, because he'd give one of my discs to the managing director of the company who was doing that conversion, and he just phoned me up and said, will you do the music? So that was good. I was still at school at that point. And then the same friend later got a job at Psygnosis, and he was looking out for me, basically, when new games came in, to see if there was any music that needed to be done. And I did a little bit of external game testing as well through him. So
for them?
Yeah, he would give me some discs to take home. I'd play them, fill in a bug sheet.
So that were just games that weren't are going to be published, or what were you testing back then?
Yeah, they were mostly finished games.
Finished
yeah, it was just
games.
final bug testing on that.
Okay,
Yeah.
so how many lemmings did you kill?
Was it in Lemmings? Yeah, I don't.
Did
It was
test that?
around the time of the Lemmings release. I remember, I can't remember which games I actually tested, but relatively soon after that I started going to college, and then I got to do, again through him, Bill's Tomato Game, the music on that.
Okay.
And that was the first real work I did for Psygnosis.
Okay. And for the Last Ninja project, which runs in the background, as far as I remember, it's System 3 that was the company that was responsible for this, and Activision was the publisher, right? So where's Psygnosis in this?
No,
It
not,
was
not in Last Ninja.
pre-
No, this was pre-Psygnosis, yeah. This
Okay.
was a small company called Consult Software that Jim Bagley used to work for. He's
Okay.
speaking, he's around, he'll be speaking
Okay.
tomorrow on the panel. And again, I had no idea that this company existed, and they'd been doing quite a lot of games over the past few years.
Okay, so they were hired to convert the
That's right, yeah, they
games
did the conversion to the Atari ST and the Amiga.
and the Amiga.
Yeah, yeah. I did a bunch of other, they did some Disney games on the Spectrum and Amiga and a few other things which I did for them as well.
So you were given an Amiga or Spectrum to test games, or?
Oh no, I had to go into their office. I mean, for Last Ninja 2, I was doing the conversion from the Commodore 64 music.
Yes.
So I had to get my Commodore 64 and play the game and record it all onto tape.
Oh.
And then I took the tape into the office and sat there playing it and then
So
doing the
you weren't allowed
conversion.
to take this home.
No, I didn't get anything. I didn't get any information or any help with that. No.
Okay.
It was a week's holiday from school, so I went to their
really?
office during that week, and then I did it there, and that was good.
Okay. So again, Last Ninja. I know the in-game music was converted from C64. It was
Yeah, mostly.
Matt Gray's, I believe, soundtrack.
That's right, yeah.
But there is also an intertune on the Amiga version. Is it yours?
Yeah. I did a few different versions, and they just chose the one that they wanted. But yeah, that's
Few different tunes that they chose to be an intro.
for the intro tune. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
So they were quite particular about it, and then if you play the game, it cuts off after about 20 seconds anyway, so
Yeah.
you don't get to hear it.
Yeah, okay. And how did you cooperate with the programmers? Did they give you the memory limit for your music, or for the tunes, or special effects?
One of the things that I became good at was very low memory and very restricted stuff. So at Psygnosis, I got all of the games that needed like 2-channel music and no
Okay.
memory. So for Last Ninja 2, everything was all 40K. Everything had to be
40K?
40K. That was for
For
each
the in-game tune.
for each of the tunes and the sound effects. So it was very, very tight. And as I say, most of the games I did were like that.
Okay. So tell me, Mike, how long it took you to come up with soundtrack for the game, more or less? I know it differs from title to title, but were you given a week or two to come up with a tune, or do it by yesterday, please?
It wasn't really that tight in deadlines. I mean, this one was a week because I had a week available. Bill's Tomato Game, I actually spent it was a couple of months on that, just bits
Really?
and pieces here and there, yeah. Because I was still at college at the time, so I wasn't doing it full time. But I had a few months, and before it got released, I actually got a job at Psygnosis then, full time as a tester. So I ended up doing the music and then testing it to final release as well. But yeah, the total period of time was 6 or 7 months for that one. Later ones were, it was all a bit random really. Some games were, we have to have this done tomorrow. And some games were, we've just got this, can you try something out, see if that works, whenever you're ready. Because not really.
Okay.
Yeah, it was all a bit random at the beginning.
All relaxed and...
But when I first started to work there, I wasn't just doing music. I mean, I did testing and a bit of everything really, design work, a bit of graphics here and there, because there weren't that many people working there. And we had a lot of games that were getting released, so if anybody needed to do something and someone was available, you just did it really. But I slowly started to do more and more audio while I was there working full time.
Okay, so did you do special effects for the games as well, or just the tunes?
Oh yeah, I did some audio programming and samples, sound effects, music, yeah, whatever needed doing really.
And do you remember some problems that you had to with the tunes, keep up with the project constraints of schedule. Do you remember something?
Not really in the Amiga era.
It was easy peasy game.
It wasn't bad. I mean, doing tracker music is pretty straightforward, but after we got into the CD era, that became a lot more difficult then. So some of the PlayStation games were very, very tight, and there was a lot of sleepless nights. Mm-hmm. The worst one I did was Lemmings Paintball.
Oh, Lemmings Paintball. Okay. Why was it the worst?
Well,
experience?
It was for the PC originally, and it was all general MIDI. And so I did the general MIDI version for that, but then they wanted a PlayStation version, but they didn't want to use CD audio, so I had to do everything using the sound chip on the PlayStation. But there were I think there were 12 tunes, and they wanted it in 3 days. But because of the way the PlayStation sound chip works, it's very awkward to convert the samples.
Okay.
There are technical reasons why getting looping samples is really difficult, and it took me such a long time. I was basically in the office for 4 days and nights with no sleep.
Okay.
And I managed to get it done on the Friday, and then nobody saw me for the next week because I was just a zombie. So that was the heaviest one I had. But as I say, it could be random. It could be. I mean, I did the music on Formula 1 on the PlayStation, and that was a big production so it's probably about 5 months for that one. Whereas, the other side of the coin was 3 days, and we need it by the end of the week.
Okay, so talking about PlayStation, I know that you got involved with lots of console titles, which obviously was the thing the Psygnosis was doing during the first half of the 90s.
Yeah.
They're publishing games for consoles. Do you remember how many soundtracks you did for them?
How many what, sorry?
Soundtracks. How many tunes you did for...
Did I do?
For the consoles.
No. it's a lot. I mean, for the console games that we were doing, because I was doing a mixture of in-house and external games. You got a list?
I have the list.
It's 20, 25, 30, something like that. And it'll be a mixture of sound effects and music as well.
More than 20.
20, okay, about 20. More than 20, okay, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, did you use Amiga for those soundtracks?
Yes, I did.
Really?
Yes, well, a good question.
So what was your production workflow? Is it just ProTracker? I believe it's
I
ProTracker.
used ProTracker until the whole internal sound chip usage disappeared. So I used ProTracker for Super Nintendo. I used it for the Mega CD because it was just the easiest way to do it. The Super Nintendo is really awkward. It was all entering hex data, and so doing that just by entering the data got very cumbersome. So instead I started to use the Amiga and write it on the Amiga first so I can transfer it more easily. And the Mega CD, I got one of the programs to write a ProTracker player so I could have that play.
Really?
Because of our games, they were very heavy graphics usage, and they constantly streamed graphics off the CD, so we couldn't play audio from the CD, so it all had to be done on the sound chip. But then after that, when we were doing CD audio, I still stuck with the Amiga, and so did Tim Wright, who worked next door to me, and we used Bars and Pipes Pro right through the entire Psygnosis time. I didn't stop using my Amiga till about 2010, actually.
Really?
Did all my music on that.
Okay, so only Amiga, or did you use only Amiga, or did you augment the sounds with synthesizers?
Oh, well, we had a lot of synths and samplers and quite a lot of gear when we moved. When the Sony money came in and they could afford to buy us some stuff, then we had quite a lot of gear, but everything was composed on the Amiga, controlling everything.
Okay, so I'm lost, but I'm getting... Okay, cool. So your last console game, what year was it? The game that you created tune for?
The last one?
Kind of.
Now, actually, I'm
really.
I'm doing a game for the Switch at the moment.
You're still doing console games,
right? Yeah. But I program the games now as well.
Really?
So so I'm doing a game for the Switch. So obviously I've done the audio as well.
Okay, so but you did most of the stuff for the 4th and the 5th generation consoles, and you stopped afterwards.
I never really stopped. No, I just sort of moved around in the game industry. So I've done production stuff. I've done a lot of programming work. I went from audio programming into doing full game programming, but I never stopped doing music. I'd always do music at the same time as well.
For each game you program?
Each of the games I was working on, and some other ones as well, because people would ask me if they've got a game in development, can you do some audio for us? So yeah, I'd do that as well. So yeah, I've never stopped. It's always been constant.
Cool.
Constant game industry, constant music. Yeah.
Okay, let's go back to Amiga.
Yeah.
When you created your work, did you use public domain samples, or maybe borrowed samples, or did you create your own samples?
Well,
this is the question that...
It's a good question, actually. Yeah, there wasn't really anywhere to get sounds from, and sound effects were even worse. It was very, very difficult to get sound effects for games, especially as games got bigger and we needed to have more of them. So we basically stole them from other games, or we sampled them from films and TV stuff. We didn't know about any sample CDs at the time. They were available, but they cost thousands and thousands. There were only a couple of them. So yeah, we didn't really have any choice. We didn't do any field recording because they wouldn't buy us any equipment to go out and record sounds because they were too cheap at the time. So yeah, it was mostly just taken from other sources and played with a little bit. I did. The one time I did go out and record was for Sensible Soccer on the Mega CD. So I recorded a proper football audience.
What? Excuse me?
Sensible Soccer
yes,
on the Mega
CD.
CD.
You recorded what?
The full.
Oh, the full
crowd. So I went to a football match, but I had a little DAT recorder. But Psygnosis was so cheap they wouldn't buy me a microphone. So I had to plug my earphones into the microphone socket and record it that way, which was pretty bad. And there was only one goal in the whole match, and it happened within about 7 seconds. And I was still setting up, so I missed the only goal sound. So I had to then steal the sound from Sky Television, and recording out of the back of that for the goal noises. But that was good. I'd never been to a football match before. So it was very cold.
Okay. So do you still remember any special techniques that you mastered during the Protaka era? You know, the module programming techniques?
Well, everything really. Everything started from there. Even going on to using full samplers. Obviously, I had years and years of sample editing and synthesizing techniques, because the Amiga is pretty rudimentary sonically, so you had to make the most out of it. So I came out of that era knowing quite a lot about audio production, but it was still a big learning curve when we got onto doing CDs. But that was good. You can do anything, but then it's more difficult because you can do anything. Having the restrictions really tightens, and in one way it's more difficult because it's more intricate, but another way it's easier because you can't stray off the path so much.
Yes. You seem to read my questions because I was going to ask you. You know, those little tunes for C64 and Amiga are still remembered, but after console tunes, not that much. Are the technical constraints the magic ingredient that the tunes had? Maybe it inspires creativity.
Oh, I could be a bit controversial here because...
Really?
Yes and no. Yes, having limitations does inspire creativity, and it could make you a lot more creative. But at the same time, there's no reason that you couldn't create that same music logically without having those creations, as proven by all the remixes that have happened of all the old tunes. But I would say at the time, most of the game musicians moving into the CD era were very, very bad at doing CD music. So they were very good within the technical constraints, and that made them more creative. I don't think it's not a musical necessity to have the limitations, but for a certain mindset, that's a very good little box to keep them in because they're happy in that little zone. But it's like I said before, when you can do anything, it makes it more difficult because you can do anything. Okay. So when you can use any sound in the world instead of my little set of samples that I've collected over the past few years, it's difficult to know where to start. And the expectations are much higher, so the production quality, it's easy to get that wrong then. So whereas it sounded good within the limited sound set of the chips or the samples, when it goes on to being a full CD audio production, it's easy for it to sound, doesn't sound as good as the music that I listen to that I buy from shops, for example. So it's easy to get that wrong. So it took a few years, I think, for most musicians to get the hang of being taken out of that little box of limitation. But
Yes.
then, of course, they carry on doing great music after that.
Okay, so which computer musicians from that era, I mean 80s and 90s, do you respect the most? Do you know them?
Oh,
Have you met them?
I have, yeah. I know most of them, yeah. The original ones on the Commodore 64, it's all the classics. It's Rob Hubbard, it's Martin Galway. I've driven Martin's Tesla, so that's cool.
Really? He lives in USA, I believe.
Yeah,
right
I
now.
went over there a few months ago, and he let me drive his Tesla, so that was good. So yeah, Martin, Ben Daglish, of course, David Whittaker.
Yes.
There are some other greats.
Yes.
On the Amiga, you've got Format, you've got Romeo Knight.
Romeo Knight.
There's a lot of great ones.
You know Chris Halsbeck?
Chris Hillsbeck, yeah, I know Chris, yeah, one of the tallest men in the world.
A camper in
He is, yeah, in a
Los
camper van
Angeles.
around the US,
I just
yeah.
read about this.
He's enjoying himself.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a
That's a
nice
good
guy,
lad.
Chris. Yeah, very good. Mm.
Okay, and getting back to now, what's in your smartphone? What kind of music do you listen to lately?
I don't really have an answer to that, because when you're working in games, you have to make every type of music. So you have to listen to every type of music.
Okay.
So I could do a game tomorrow that needs country and western.
Okay.
So I would have to then dig out a lot of country and western music and surround myself with that, so I can get the little style pointers and so on, and then to recreate that thing. So it means throughout the years I enjoy everything, really, everything from Liszt to baby metal to all sorts, really.
Okay. And which bands influenced you the most in the 80s and 90s?
Faith No More, KLF. In terms of bands, Art of Noise, actually, I didn't realize how much I was influenced by the Art of Noise until I got their collection. They did a CD collection of everything they'd released, and I was listening to it, and I was so familiar with everything they'd ever done. So I must have just had it on in the background all the time around that period of time. So that was quite a big influence on me, that, and I never really realized it until later. So they were very good. They were the major ones, I think. Frankie Goes to Hollywood, actually, in terms of production, because the production on it is amazing. Trevor Horn was absolutely brilliant.
Trevor produced Frankie.
Yeah, so that, in terms of just production techniques and so on, that was quite an influence on me as well. So I like that. I like that very intricate, full spectrum sound, and that's what I go for each
and
time.
obviously Trevor Horn is Art of Noise.
Yeah, he's one of the Art of Noise. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you were saying that right now you are still in the business.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
What do you do?
Well, I was running a games company with a friend of mine for about 10 years, and I recently left that to pursue other ideas. So yeah, I've just been doing bits of freelance work for the past year or so. Bits of programming, as I say, I'm doing a game at the moment. Bits of programming, bits of music, just whatever comes along really at the moment.
Okay,
then we'll see.
Did someone approach you to make a tune for retro game?
Oh, of course, yeah. There's the Amiga Power album, which I did recently. That's a remake from I did Bill's Tomato Game, and I remade the music for Hired Guns, so that was nice to go back to. And retro style games, I did Kick-Off Revival, the remake of Kick-Off for the PlayStation 4. I did that about a year ago, I think. That's about it, recently, yeah. So I don't get them every day, but they come across my path every now and then, so I'll indulge in those.
And what do you think about people coming back to those old computers, enjoying with their kids? And
well, it's good. The power of the midlife crisis is amazing.
yes, it is.
Because it's all people of my age who want to go and revisit their childhood. And there is some amazing stuff, there really is. There's a lot of stuff that I go back to. And when you're older, you see it with different eyes than you did as a child. So I can play games now looking at them differently and appreciate them in a different way than I used to at the time. And I'm sure a lot of people are exactly the same, so you find a new way to enjoy it.
So you're enjoying shows like this?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
You have been to which shows?
Well, I did a Psygnosis talk at Play in Manchester in the UK last year. I've been to the Amiga events. This is my first time at Pixel. I'm sure there's another couple lurking in there that I've been to. I'm not sure. Yeah, but it's great. More the merrier. Yeah,
Yes,
it's good.
brings
It's
some-
my era, so being surrounded by more people of my era, that's always good, isn't it?
Yes.
Shared interests.
Okay. Czy mamy jakieś pytania? Is there any questions you want to ask Mike?
Is there any?
Okay.
No Psygnosis stories?
You have one.
Do I have one?
Yeah, or maybe two.
Well, it's a long period of time, Psygnosis. Let's see what's interesting. About 3 weeks after I joined, there was a football match between Psygnosis and Ocean.
Oh.
And Ocean's goalkeeper got his leg broken. So that stopped the match pretty quickly, and we never had any more football matches again.
Who broke it?
It was, I know who it was actually, it was one of our artists, Neil Thompson. He was a bit aggressive on the goal line there, yeah, broke the goalie's leg. Sorry. What else was there? Before we got the Sony money, we were split into 3 buildings, and we'd started doing the PlayStation stuff. And the building that we moved into it was horrible. It was just awful. It was a dirty old office that has probably never been cleaned in 5 years. And we got put into there for a year and a half, and it just got worse when sweaty developers had been in there for another year. But when we left, we found out that somebody had left a bin bag behind one of the desks, and it must have been there for possibly since before we moved in, because when somebody lifted it up, it had melted through the bag, melted the entire carpet underneath. And it was this horrendous smell with fumes coming off it, and we had to get men to come in wearing biohazard suits with the helmets and everything to clean this patch of carpet. But after that, we moved into a nice new building, so it was all custom built from then on. Yeah, but before that, it was all held together with tape and string. It really was. Yeah, you wouldn't know it with the nice packaging and all looking so sleek and marketed so well. But behind the scenes, it could be a bit messy. Yeah.
Okay, our time is up.
Okay.
So thank you, Mike.
Well, thanks you for attending.
Dziękujemy bardzo.
All right. Thank you. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. How do you switch it off? You told that you were inspired by the KLF?
Yeah.
I love KLF.
Absolutely. Yeah.